Well, welcome to another episode of On the Border with George Altgeld. Today, it's my privilege to have two new guests. One's actually a sound engineer guy, Benny Contreras.
Yeah, how's it going?
And my other very distinguished guest is former city council member Eliseo Valdez Jr., correct?
Correct, yes.
There was a senior, your dad, and when I was searching you up on the internet, I got his obituary. He died back in 2012, 2013.
I had cancer.
And so you've had a distinguished career in public service. You were a city council member from 1996 through to 2004.
Correct.
And basically right after NAFTA happened, you and your colleagues were at the helm of the city during one of our biggest growth spurts ever. I think at one point in time we were competing with Las Vegas as one of the fastest growing cities in the nation. When you look back on your service, what do you see as some of the highlights? And when you look at what's going on right now, what's your comparative analysis?
Well, first of all, I thank God for the privilege of having served the people. You mentioned my dad. You looked at his obituary. He got me and my brother and the whole family involved in giving back to the community, serving the community. He was a great community leader. He was a big union representative in the city of Laredo. And he was heavily involved in politics. So he got my brother and I involved at a real early age, walking the streets, handing out flyers for certain candidates that were real supportive of the union. So we got involved at the grassroots level real early in our age. Now, going back to my city council days, I was blessed to have been part of city council during the time the city had the most explosive growth ever. Real proud to have been in the city council with two great leaders, under Saul Ramirez, mayor back then, and then Betty Flores, two mayors that have been highly respected and I have a lot of respect for. They're highly respected, admired in Austin, Washington, and New York.
Saul Ramirez, but he was actually snatched up after his term. After he termed out, he was picked up by the Clinton administration, if memory serves correct.
To the Undersecretary of HUD.
Undersecretary, yeah.
It's a great leader.
Right. And of course, Mayor Betty Flores, also very well respected throughout the state of Texas and also up in Washington, D.C. as someone that, this is me kind of looking at her as someone who could really bring people together and get things done. She had that charisma, that gravitas as a leader.
And had great vision, and knew how to articulate that anywhere we went.
And so, okay, so you guys, you got to work with some great people. You all, if as I understood it, you all built the World Trade Bridge. You all built the police and fire training facility off of Mines Road. You built the transit station downtown. You all, floated bonds for all these things, including the construction of the municipal court, multiple satellite police and fire stations, and you all harnessed sales tax to build the arena, and you also marshaled community development block grants for, water and sewer and construction of other infrastructure within the inner city. You all had an aggressive street resurfacing program. That's a solid 8 years. I mean, if I'm being really honest, I'm a little bit jealous, because I wasn't there for 2 full terms, but I was there for about 6 years, and we didn't get nearly any of that level of, work done. And certainly even recently, we're not really seeing much being done. When you reflect, kind of then and now, what is, you have any?
I feel one of the most important things is, first of all, I'll repeat myself, we were there during the time the city had the most explosive growth. And one of our big projects and the tremendous need that we had in the community because of all the accidents that we had on I-35 because of the NAFTA trade and all the tractor trailers lined up from the bridge all the way past Delmar. There were several accidents there. So our big priority is public safety. So our biggest project was the World Trade Bridge. And We saw that from ground up. And here again, we had tremendous leadership. We had tremendous city managers. We had tremendous support staff. And one thing that I see is very important, and I've always brought that up, it's always, you have to have continuity in the districts. I was blessed to have been there for 2 terms, 2 4-year terms, and I always kept my projects in the front burner. You have to do, you have to do the feasibility studies, the engineering studies, and then you have to start appropriating money for your project. So that's very important. Continuity is very important. So you need to make sure you could qualify people on the city council, people who have vision. They can work together, not be lone rangers there, work together with the staff, get their support behind you.
Because y'all had like a real certified card-carrying city planner at the time. Y'all had Keith Selman. I think even before him was Marina Sukup. You all had like what we look back on. You all had trained public, servants, professionals that knew their fields really well. And you don't have to comment on this, but me looking at some of the folks that are in place now, we don't have that level of staff. We have, and then back then, I mean, we were importing so much of our talent, and we were retaining so much of our talent. Keith, he wasn't from here. Marina wasn't from here. We, Ria Zulmia, a lot of the folks that we were utilizing were not from Laredo, and so we have this cross pollination that was going, and now more than ever, it seems like so much of our talent is leaving. I attended a downtown inner city revitalization summit about a year ago, and this keynote speaker who helped San Antonio bring back their downtown, and they still have a long way to go, but from where it was to where it is now is day and night. And he, of course, said, you need mixed market housing, folks. That's how you bring back a downtown. And he's from Laredo, and he left and practiced his craft in San Antonio, where he was welcomed with such open arms. And now he's, trying to tell us, hey guys, it's the mixed market housing. By the way, H.B. Zachary, when he wrote his autobiography all those years ago, had the Laredo plan to, clean up Zacate Creek and to have housing, a mixed market housing built along the sides of it. He wrote about green spaces, open spaces, tax increment reinvestment zones, incentives for developers to put the capital down, but then to get paid back over time using the increment by which the tax base grew, right? Very pioneering for its time. And only recently has the city kind of enacted that, but hasn't really set a policy for it to get done. And I did a photo shoot not too long ago. I share your passion for photography as well. And I walked through downtown with my camera about a week ago. And it's each time I go, there's more and more buildings boarded up. There's, more and more of a homeless population making use of the streets as their restrooms. And that population needs to be looked for and cared for, but you can meaningfully and carefully relocate them once you have folks living in downtown, but nobody's going to build downtown out for public housing and mixed market housing unless the city incentivizes it.
Well, look at what H.B. Zachary did. He took his idea to San Antonio to have the Riverwalk.
That's right.
Laredo has a lot going for it. We have a rich history. Geographically, we're blessed. We have a lot going for it that we could capitalize on. We had some great people downtown back then. The Nortons, the Rupanis, Norbert Dickman, and the Faskins, and Aldo Tatangelo did a lot. Back then when I was in the city council, we hired an architectural firm to come up with ideas and have these people redo the facade, some of these buildings.
Mm-hmm.
We created a tax reinvestment zone. when you go to San Antonio, go down the Riverwalk, when you look up at some of those buildings, magnificent buildings, you see some of the architecture on some of those buildings. They're rich. We can do the same thing downtown.
We have some of the same
We have some of
architecture.
the
You know,
same
they have a
architecture.
Crest building. We have a Crest building. They've got a Woolworth building. We've got a Woolworth. They got a Sanborns. We got a Sanborns. We have a lot of the bones of a lot of the infrastructure already in place, but the city council has not come forward with a vision saying, hey, you all need to do these things. You know, we need people living in downtown. There's a great podcast, by the way, by this guy named Eddie Aldrete that may sound a little familiar to you. Eddie used to work for IBC in their communications department, if memory serves correct. He started a public relations and political strategy company. He now has a podcast in San Antonio. He's not living in Laredo anymore. We lost him too. It's called Beyond the Bite. And he had the mayoral candidates for the city of San Antonio on for a debate in front of a live audience. And one of them is like this retired, 4-star general, a young Latina. And another one is also, phenomenal candidate as well. I mean, what we would give to have people like that running for office here in Laredo. And by the way, I think we've got people like that, but they haven't answered the call yet. And I'm hoping that they do, because they're needed now more than ever to enter into public office. But the point that Eddie was making, and that if you read the literature on urban redevelopment, the running metric is you can judge a city's economic vibrance by the quality of its downtown. And if that is the barra by which we are going to be, measured, we are failing. And if you look at what we have, is a very bipolar economy. We have, we got a lot of folks that are doing really, really well. And we got about 30% of folks that are at or below the poverty line. And we don't have a city that's setting as a priority that these values for inner city and downtown redevelopment. And I'm wondering, well, let me ask you this: like, what's one of your favorite Texas cities to go visit?
I think San Antonio is still, it has a feeling of a small city and has a lot of things that big cities offer.
And what do you like about San Antonio when you go visit San Antonio?
The variety they have of restaurants and entertainment.
And where do y'all normally stay when you go to San Antonio?
Downtown.
Yeah. I mean, so do I. By the way, San Antonio is one of my favorite cities to go visit, not only in Texas, but just in general. I really like the fact that I can get out of my car, leave it in a garage, and not set foot in it for another, 48, 72 hours until I'm ready to come home, because I can walk around everywhere and find good restaurants, interesting experiences. And I mean, I get it. We're not on anybody's tourist destination. Laredo's gone. Nobody's coming to Laredo anymore to go walk across and go to the Cadillac. But there's still this local talent that we can definitely capture and incentivize to open businesses.
And I agree with you. There's a lot of good local talent. We had some good restaurants that opened for a short period of time and then fail. Now, as far as downtown, the idea of bringing housing into the downtown area, that idea was proposed way back then when I was on the city council. We would propose the idea of turning the old Sears building into dorms for college kids to keep the kids downtown.
Which is a great idea, because Laredo College is right there downtown, and they don't have any real housing opportunities anymore. As I understand it, they demoed some of their dorms, if not all of them, in order to build other things. And so having college, that segment of the population, right, a young, segment of the population living downtown would be phenomenal. I believe under your watch, you guys did the Hotel Hamilton, where you incentivized a developer to build assisted living for the elderly, which is a great idea. And many other cities have taken that same approach, but now they're blending in the mid-level parts of the economic sector, and they're blending in that kind of luxury level as well. So there's, townhomes and condominiums and the repurposing of those empty second and third stories downtown for living, which then drives the repurposing of those boarded up first floors for the grocery stores and the restaurants and the places to go and convivir, right, to live.
And then public safety is very important. We even had the bike patrols to keep the people safe down.
That's right. Those guys are kind of gone.
I know. I mean,
Yeah.
complain about that, but we did that. Here again, I mentioned during the time I was on city council, we built up a lot of police and fire facilities.
Those little satellite substations.
Yeah, and they're abandoned right now,
And why not repurpose them to be, like what we have the Mile One, right? It's this economic development incubator where, if somebody needs to send, to scan something and email it, or needs a conference room, or, needs an air conditioned place to meet a new potential client. Like, why not, be thinking outside of the box where we can repurpose some of these facilities?
And the concept and the idea of these satellite police stations was great. The community-oriented policing, get the police to walk around the district, get the neighborhood people to help them fight crime. And the concept was great. I think former Chief Dovalina brought up the idea, and it worked for a while, but was short-lived.
And then also, we've got the old base, right? That if you drive through it today, you can see just a lot of empty, open spaces, like giant whole blocks that currently the city has management control over, but nobody's leasing them or making use of them. The city's not making use of them. And what other cities have done, like San Antonio with Kelly Air Force Base, and there was another base, I think it's Brooks. No, forgive me, I forget the name of the other base. These bases were turned over to the city and said, look, you guys can have them, so long as you use them to do some form of economic development. And that's what they've done. I mean, they're manufacturing solar panels, they're doing light manufacturing for a variety of different things, and creating spaces for startups to be able to go in and get up off the ground. And so
I agree with you. A lot more done. That we need to build, take advantage of the freight system because of the international trade business. Then we have LMC, UT Health Science Center, and places like that, the specialty hospital.
Yeah, and they're already there. There's also a couple of different medical facilities and
The
medical
Gateway Community Center.
school and a gateway.
So there's room for a lot more of that we need. We're underserved medically in our community, and I think we should be attracting more specialists and more of that kind of growth.
And in our 2017 comprehensive plan, one of the things it says, hey, Laredo, develop yourselves into a regional medical hub. Why aren't you all servicing more, Hebron, Cotulla, the surrounding areas? Why aren't you really making yourselves available to these other Bruni, Oilton, Mirando, Rio Bravo communities and Mexico? Like, why aren't you attracting? And it's actually the other way around. Think about how many of us go to Nuevo Laredo to go see the dentist or to go to the doctor, because it not only is it more affordable, frankly, it's more effective. Whenever I'm coming down with something pretty serious, if I can't get my local doctor to give me a shot, I'll just go into a pharmacy, and $9 later and 24 hours later, I'm back on my feet like it was nothing. But we that's anecdotal an example, but why not? Why aren't we harnessing? Why aren't we following our own comprehensive plan? I mean, I wonder, you mentioned that architectural plan, those architectural plans that y'all put together back in the day, right?
To revitalize downtown.
To revitalize downtown. Whatever happened to those plans?
Well, I think the private sector should have done more to step in and meet us part of the way.
Yeah.
I mean, the taxpayer can't do it all.
And no, Biddy, outside looking in. I mean, I know we're kind of like insiders. I mean, you've spent some time. You try to get a business going downtown. Y'all hung in there for years. What what do you think would have helped y'all stay afloat or succeeded?
That's a good question. I think and attracting the people to the downtown. For some reason, there's this stigma of the downtown is like dirty or whatever, that people don't want to go downtown. They want to go to the north side for these businesses now. So for me, from what I experienced, it's attracting the people, the customer base to downtown, make it attractive.
Well, and we did have a lot of that, Benny. In fact, I remember people coming from Mexico to the United States and were impressed and going downtown working, going into a shop like Casa Güero or places they could buy this expensive jewelry, 20 pairs of sunglasses for this or that, hardly anything. And we had those kind of businesses that would bring people downtown. It was beautiful to go down.
Yeah.
Here again, we're rich in a lot of history, a lot of beautiful buildings. We just got to, it's not impossible. It can be done.
Well, you touched on something though, attract people, right? And so my law office used to be downtown for years, and I made a calculated decision that I wanted my office to be closer to the people that could afford the services that I was offering. And I'm right off of Del Mar, and I'm right behind Del Mar C, and a stone throw from JSJ and Regency and Del Mar A and Del Mar B and Plantation and the north side, right? And so like Starbucks, so many of us business owners, we set up, because we want to be in proximity to residential rooftops, and not just any residential rooftops, but the type of residential rooftop that we're hoping to seek, right? And my question is somewhat rhetorical, because I've been studying this a lot, and our own experts that we hired to help us do the 2017 Viva Laredo comprehensive plan all said, your outlet mall, pues que chulos. I mean, you're really like, nobody's gonna really make that, last a long time, because nobody's living in proximity to that mall. Just like the rest of your downtown is not going to come back until there's people living downtown. And when if we go back out, right, and kind of follow history, the downtown was doing all right for a long time. I mean, it was the heart and soul of this city. And then the mall was built. And then there was a migration of businesses and customers to the mall. And then Walmart was built, and Target and Dollar Generals and other big boxes, right? And then we saw, I mean, nowadays the mall is kind of a lifestyle center. I mean, some of these places are barely holding on. And then you take Amazon and online shopping, and now you've got the death of the mall and a lot of the big boxes. And so we know tourism's not coming back. We know shopping is not coming back. People aren't going to drive a long, long ways so they could buy some Pumas at mall in Laredo when they can get them in Monterrey, or go to the Valley and have a much different experience. And so, if we only had a convention center downtown, or if we only had some other white elephant, by God, it's all the data supports it's the housing, stupid. And so when we're interfacing with the downtown business community, and now the Killiams, who are very calculated, bought up large swaths of downtown Laredo. I've seen some of their advertising. It sounds like they're going to be doing some offices, and that will be interesting. But until you got people living there, and I don't, mixed market housing, then it's not going to happen. So anyway, looking forward to the city, hopefully incentivizing. To your point, no, man, the government's not here to fix all your problems. So we're not here to bankroll your redevelopment of downtown. And I don't think anybody's advocating for that. But hey, here's an incentive. We can abate your taxes. We can, capture the increment. We can deliver some utilities to you. Like, we can make it economically feasible for you to repurpose an old building versus some more suburban sprawl and another strip mall on the north side of town.
Well, you mentioned some of the vacant buildings downtown, and you mentioned then there's a Laredo Mall that we have, I think the key to the whole thing is the tax incentives and to get the people they own those facilities to reinvest. We can't, because when you look at downtowns, back in the time when I was in the city council, some of the, I guess, business owners still want to charge rent for these people going to town like they used to during the good old days. Then you look at the mall and the same thing, you go to San Antonio, walk some of these malls during the day. Some are practically empty.
Yeah.
And they survive.
Yeah. But you go to the Pearl, that old brewery, right? That built into it condos and built into it some apartments that are in and around that area, and built into it farmers market, and how the rooftops eventually is what drove that restaurant to open up or that venue to open up. It's organic and it's bottom up. It's very much the residential rooftops that drive what the commercial activity is going to be, not the other way around. And so, and that's just that. I mean, that's one of many examples. And of course, Laredo doesn't have the market cornered and dying downtowns. I was up in Texarkana on a federal case not too long ago, and I mean, everything was boarded up except the sheriff's office, the city hall, and the federal courthouse and the jail. The only thing that was still alive was essentially the prison industrial complex, if you will. And unfortunately, all those businesses are booming downtown here as well, right? But I should say, I'm using the term business loosely, but I guess kind of shifting gears to that person who thinks that they would like to step up and answer the call to service. Like, what's one of the gut checks that they should do?
Well, first of all, you have to have a heart. A heart has to be in the right place, and you don't just wake up from one day to another. Say, you want to be on the city council, want to be a county judge, you want to be a commissioner. I think you need to put your feelers out there and work your way up. I mean, I was in the Parks Board, I was in the Planning and Zoning Commission 8 years before, and city councils had a lot of great people who come out of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And so you have to work your way up to put your feelers out there and have a sense of what's going on in different segments of the community.
And what were you you were telling me, like, hey, back in the day, like, when we didn't get paid,
That's another thing. You have to have a servant's heart. First of all, when I was on the city council, we used to get $500 a month. We used to walk around with a pager and the phone. Constituents used to call us direct. We had one secretary for all the council people. We weren't there to give us a 40% raise. We weren't in there to give us a
pension plan.
I mean, who wouldn't want to work for a place like that?
Yeah,
we weren't in there for that. We really had a sincere heart to serve, and we weren't perfect, but we had a heart to try and make Laredo a better place to live.
Yeah, y'all got paid less but got more done. In comparison to
we had great
today.
Leadership, great staff in all the different departments, and a lot of credit goes to the former mayors that we had. Great people with a lot of vision, a lot of heart.
Yeah,
highly respected people.
Yeah, and so then that would be candidate. I'm too busy. I really want to, but I'm too busy. I've got my my business or my career. What do you say? What, if anything, do you say to them?
And you got to make time for the people you're going to serve.
Because maybe it's not time, right? Maybe it's not your time. Yeah.
And one thing I'm very encouraged. I mean, I keep going back and forth. We're still talking. We're talking about the downtown area. It's news to me that the Killings were going to invest in a big segment. That's a step in the right direction already.
Yeah,
and everything they do turns to gold. So hopefully they can buy off bigger segment of the downtown area and do with some of what the Bass family did in Fort Worth.
right? What
Some of the Hunt, Zachary,
the Hunt family did in El Paso, the HB Zachary did in San Antonio. Sometimes it takes an economic Goliath to come in and get done what the public sector can't.
And we were a diamond for South Texas. We're glowing diamond now. We're a diamond in the rough. That can be
Now we're a
diamond in the rough again, but
an old crystal,
we're
maybe.
geographically blessed. We're blessed with a tremendous history. The city of Laredo's got a lot to offer. It just need to put the fire under people and get it done. And then the people that want to serve the public, make sure they have the heart in the right place, may have the time to serve. And once they start serving, make sure that they're accessible to the people they represent.
And I wonder, how do we retain talent? Yeah, how do we retain? So many of our youth, they grow up, they go out of town, and they don't come back.
Well, if you have Texas A&M International, for example, you have people come from all over the world to Texas A&M. Certainly has a lot to offer. There's a lot of talent in Laredo, and it's got to be a lot more in our community to keep our kids here in Laredo.
Well, Beyond the Bite, that podcast I was telling you about, they interviewed the president of UTSA, and he was talking about how, back in the day they were kind of really not considered, a top tier, college, but how over time they very purposefully engineered themselves to be a, first class educational institution, and how they built a pipeline at the elementary school level through to high school, through to college, and then they had, quality, good paying, both skilled labor, vocational and professional jobs on the other side of that pipeline, and how they were kind of there in the middle to really, keep things in San Antonio, develop those vulnerable parts of the city, get them into the educational pipeline, not the, school to prison pipeline, get them into that educational pipeline, and then retain them once they're done, because your city's got something to offer, right? And I look around, not everyone, but a lot of folks that because you run into them wherever you go, you always run into a Laredoan somewhere, and how we've exported, so many of our greats, including that young man that took off to San Antonio to redevelop their downtown. How cool would it have been for him to stick around here? But it's a real challenge, really, to operate in this space, because we are so isolated, and we were blessed by our geography, from an international trade standpoint, sure, but we're also cursed by that geography because, well, we're breathing in all that NAFTA air, right? All that diesel, and so much of the rest of the our best talent, they get a taste for San Antonio, they get a taste for other parts of the country, and then we only see them on Thanksgiving and Christmas if we're lucky. But so you're also very involved at your church, as I understand it.
Oh yes, I mean that's the root of it all.
And
it's a good thing for the family. It all starts with the family unit. That's very
yeah.
And you have to be rooted in the church, and a tremendous church. I go to a Church of the Cross.
Yeah,
it's produced a lot of great people in our community.
A lot of good talent.
Has
gone through those doors. I see some of it's still there, and some of it's been exported about the world. But yeah, and I've had the pleasure of going to Church of the Crossroads on many occasions, and actually watching your son, Gabriel, jam out and play in the band. A lot of really talented musicians up on the band there, and his wife does vocals, if I'm not mistaken, right?
So are their kids. They're also his wife is.
Yeah,
their kids are also musicians on worship service. So, I mean, yeah, if your family's founded in godly principles, you can't go wrong. Can't go wrong.
So many of, I think, this country's greatest musicians got their start in the church. If I go through kind of some of my personal favorites, so many of them, their foundations were playing, in the church. But for me, obviously the star of the show is Pastor Sandra. Her life journey is inspirational, and then she's so talented as a trial lawyer. We fancy ourselves as really capable public speakers, but when I watch her in action, I realize how far I have to go because she's incredible.
She's worked at grassroots level, and she's been all over the world. She has a lot of talent.
Yeah.
Tremendous person, tremendous heart, true servant's heart. And then her husband, I'll share this one thing with you. When I first ran for city council, I was already going for Crossroads. And I even got my pastor-in-law walking the streets of Laredo with me, that.
You got Pastor Norman to hit the streets?
Oh, yeah, he did.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. Yeah.
Exposure Hill. You could talk to them about that. He'll never forget that. But they're great people.
Yes.
It's blessed to be part of that community. And
that's where you two met.
Yeah, that's my buddy here. It's part of, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy how we ended up here all together again. It's a great church.
It's a testament of the church and back to the community.
And so I'd ran into Benny the other day and how you been, small talk, and I was talking about how, I got this little podcast and we're trying to work out the kinks, and if only there was maybe somebody that could help me with the sound and the hardware. And he was like, well, just so happens that I know a little bit about this kind of stuff. And I was like, really? Okay, well, get on over here and let's visit. And then we started, and I didn't know you were attending the church, but we started talking about the interconnectivity of everything, right? If you take a deep dive into the science just so happens to mirror a scripture, Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy. So much of this theory of oneness is grounded both in faith and in science. And so we kind of started geeking out on some of the new developments in science. And in fact, shows that oneness. For instance, the heart in your chest, primarily, it pumps blood, right? At the core of blood is hemoglobin. And at the core of hemoglobin is iron, an element that only exists because over the billions and billions of years, stars have been born from the collision and destruction of galaxies, and then rebirthing additional stars, and the superheated, nuclear activity of hydrogen and helium, and the way and I'm not going to do a really great job of describing the science, but essentially iron, stardust, is born from that. And so that same iron, everybody has that. Plants have their version of it. It's called magnesium, that forms chlorophyll, which is, plant blood. And our DNA is like 70 to 90% similar with that of plants. So it's all, it's all one. And what it is it's vibration. We kept coming back to sound. Sound is like this reoccurring theme in the things that Benny and I were talking about. And everything is vibration and frequency. And so you had shared that one bit of information with me about how when there's a good vibration, there's coherence.
Yes.
And they've even studied how when, folks get together, how their heart rates will start to synchronize, right? And you think about, maybe some of the scripture, right, where 2 or 3 are gathered, so am I. And just, well, okay, well, you got to manifest good stuff, right? The Buddhists talk a lot about manifestation, mindfulness, and, Proverbs says, as you think, so shall you be. So you better be real careful what you think about, right? And just, there's so many parallels. I'm not doing the parallels justice between how everyone is saying the same thing and just in different ways relevant to their geography. And we could focus on the divisions, like, no, this is the way, like, oh, no, this is the way. And if you're not doing it this way, then you're condemned. But the reality is we have way more in common than we do different. And I think that holds true in politics, especially national politics, especially with all the division, the algorithmic division, right? Because if you get on social media or you turn on YouTube, it's all about dividing people that have so much in common. And if you look to history, right, like the Hutus and the Tutsis who lived together peacefully for generations until some private interest started turning neighbor against neighbor, and we had this, horrible genocide,
The divide and conquer.
the genocide take place. And so Vanny and I were really talking about how we wanted to make this space a space that is not about division, a space that really calls on that unity that as practitioners of your faith, you have to, reach out and find.
Or there's no denying that we have a divine creator, and I appreciate you keeping this as positive. When you invited me here and say, I'm positive. And when you get into politics, it's real easy to drive that wedge and for the division to be there. And
Yeah.
it's happening across the nation, all across the world, and I have issues with the far left wokeness. Don't even get me started there. But we talk, if it's Christ-centered and your mind is Christ-centered, you can't go wrong. That's the way the family should be, and that's where our mentality should be. And to try and do away with this division.
And I've been on this readjusted path because I was one of those that was really just trying to drill down and drive down on those whom I perceived to be not operating in the best interest of the city or of the nation. And instead of focusing on what instead of destroying what you don't want, what if you focused on creating what you do want, right? And so, whereas before maybe I would have, because I'm a lawyer, right? I can argue on the left and I can argue on the right, right? And whereas before I may have picked up the don't get me started on the far right, with the don't get me started on the wokeness comment, right? And all of those are dog whistles, and when I'm in dog mode, I'll respond, but I'm really trying to just be like, hey man, like hay sol para todos, and God smiles on everybody. And what is it our parents used to say, that it takes all kinds, right? And we can agree to disagree. And and then the other one, the big one, is when Jesus and Barabbas were nailed up onto the cross, right?
Mhm.
And people are just doing all sorts of really demeaning things to Christ. If I recall the story correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong. And Barabbas is kind of like, hey dude, like, aren't you the son of God? Like, why don't you, strike them down, or and the response was, forgive them, they know not what they do, right? And there is where when you encounter folks that do have that divisive model, where instead of like wishing they were gone, and I've caught myself doing that, you got to whoa, I'm going to send a prayer instead, right? Because they know not what they do, and Lord knows, probably know not what I do either. And so I'm praying for that grace and the direction.
Well, the way I see it and what I believe, George, is first of all, when you're in politics, you're in the public eye, and we're just in the reflection extension of the people that place you there. And when you're there, a lot of us are not there by accident, that, God gives you, pray for the Lord's favor and you're there. But once you're there, you have a responsibility. The Bible says, to whom much is given, much is required.
Yep.
You can't abuse that authority, and there's been some abuse of that across the nation.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be held accountable one of these days. So much is given, much is required. So you have a responsibility to the people you serve. They're to serve, not to serve yourself. Yeah.
And revenge is mine, so saith the Lord, right? So you can let God fight those battles too, right? You don't have to fight every one of those. And so actually, some of the greatest victories that I've had have not been because I picked up a sword, because I let go, let God. And
one thing that I learned early in the city council, one thing is
And-
work with a peaceful heart. The way to get things done is to build consensus and build unity among the body that you're serving with. And that's why I take great pride in being sensitive to the will of God and praying for, here again, I asked the Lord to give me favor when I first ran. I prayed for every night for the Lord to give me wisdom. So I think I learned to work with the majority of the council there, to where I always had their support in everything that I asked for. There was never anything that I asked for my district. It was every denied by the group. And we had our debates. You had different minds there. But you learn to respect each other, who they are, and what they bring to the table.
yeah, because we don't have all the answers, right? And sometimes the things you think you really want, for you or for your district, and you don't get them, and then you look back and you're like, oh, thank God that didn't go through, because to that old adage, right? Some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers, because you think that's what's best, but it's not, and the mystery doesn't reveal itself until later on.
Especially in this instant microwave world that we live in, there you want it right there, right then and now, and God knows when will be the best time.
Yeah, and it's and that short term is not the reality. It's the long game, and the long game is that we're just spirits having a temporary human experience, not the other way around. Everybody thinks, oh, every now and then, like every Sunday, I have a spiritual experience. No, cabrón, you're having one all the time, and that temporary time frame is the lifetime.
It's
That's yours. It's in your pocket.
how's that?
Did you set the timer for an hour?
No, set a phone alert. I don't know what that is. Well, anyway, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Edit that, my friend.
Yeah. Well, we're all passing through, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
And Benny and I were sharing with each other kind of our world beliefs, and that, the world that you fight for in this lifetime is the one that you'll inherit in the next. And so, strive for a better world, but a better world starts right here. And so, I've been, reflecting a lot on, okay, well, how can I be a better version of myself, right? Because that's really the only thing you're going to give to the world. And by the way, you and your wife, I don't know your other children, but the little I've gotten to know Gabe, thank you both for giving the world a great guy. He's a fine example of humanity.
Oh, and I have another son that's also a blessing in our lives, and
Who's he? What's his name?
Joseph.
Okay.
All biblical names.
Yeah.
And I thank God for having me paired me off with my wife. Two of me would have been a disaster. God knew what he was doing when he put her in my life,
Yeah. Well, I think I definitely say that's the case for me too. Yeah. And she's amazing. Yeah.
Fantastic woman.
She's a warrior. She's a fighter. Yeah. And how about you, Benny? What it's your first run at being a sound engineer and video guy. What are you thinking, man?
Well, right now I'm trying to keep pace with,
working the buttons. Yeah.
At the same time, this conversation is awesome. It's phenomenal. And I was telling George how awesome this is God's will for me to and George to cross paths, and then for me to come work here. And then lo and behold, it's you that's here doing the interview. That we're meant to be here,
I couldn't agree with you more. And it's a blessing to see you here. I was pleasantly surprised. And then when I first, George walking into our church at Crossroads, I've been there for over 40 years. When I saw George walking in there with his family, and then you and your family, it's a great place, man. And if you put God first in your life, everything else should fall in place perfectly.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, the political environment in Laredo was just so toxic at the time, and frankly, that really drove my wife and I to the Church of the Crossroads. We were like, man, we got to find some shelter from the storm. At any given time, there was a whole line of little leaguers and fire department, fire union and police union folks with pitchforks and torches waiting for me at the end of every council meeting, because I was really critical about, the city spending so much money on those big salaries and on those big facilities, and how basically the Pony League just has free use of, and so does the Little League, free use of all of our facilities, and ni siquiera ponen un cinco, right? And how we don't have money for anything else because 65% of the budget goes to fire and police, and how every year or every couple of years when they renegotiate their contracts, it's just like, man, like everybody else take a back seat because we're going to remain the best paid police and fire departments in the state of Texas. And then that's all there is to it. And
I saw that. I lived through that. I know exactly where you're coming from.
And then you look at, well, who's participating in local elections, and the ones that are donating are the police union, the fire union, and the development community. And so no one is really advocating on behalf of, that taxpayer in Del Mar A, or that taxpayer that's, just, the regular Joe, right? And so when I really, began to, feel as if, that all these political forces were aligning, but then you realize that when you're living your life's purpose, to quote Paulo Coelho, right? When you're living your life's purpose, the universe conspires to help you, and that no weapon formed against you can bring you harm. And so, go bring more pitchforks, because you're gonna need them, because I'm not worried about you all causing some sort of harm, and I'm no longer gonna have my peace be taken, because my faith tells me that to have peace, and that it's all going to be all right.
And I'm glad you brought that up. You saw the end result of the most recent bond election we had.
Yes.
The way that we're serving it to the public, the impact of the average taxpayer won't be more than the cost of a hamburger. Come on,
Yeah.
See people retire fixed income. Elderly people worked all their lives on the verge of losing their homes, so they can't pay their taxes.
And
how many sheriff sales do you see? I mean,
yeah.
And there are ways of doing it. And I'm glad they're starting to think out of the box again and proposing new ways of doing things. But it was served. It was pretty bad.
And the plan was so ill conceived. Like, it didn't have any meaningful public input. Like, they didn't ask folks, hey, what do you want? And by the way, they did ask folks what they wanted. There were like a half year's worth of meetings. Over 1,500 participants helped put together the 2017 plan, Viva Laredo Comprehensive Plan. Like, people showed up and said, I would like my city to look like this in 5, 10, and 20 years. And like, we already have the manual, and nowhere in that manual did it say, hey, we really want a $600 square foot Taj Mahal, police station, or all of these other, fancy fire stations. It said we want to have a city that's livable, that is climate resilient, that has park space, and that has active transit, that has more than 4 ways to go north to south. Like, we want an integrated, vibrant downtown that has people living in it. I mean, that people really came forward and said, these are the things we want. And city management and city council just ignored all of that. And thankfully the taxpayers spoke very loud, very clear. A resounding 80% said, hell no. My hope would be that the same folks that came out would come out to create the things that they do want. A bunch of people came out to destroy the thing that they didn't want, and right on them. But now it's time to come out and create the things that they do want. And creation, as we know, is a lot harder than destruction, right? It's easy to demo something.
Mhm.
It's a lot harder to build it.
Yeah.
And what was that quote you gave us, Benny, about sound? That on the it was a quote from Genesis.
Oh, since everything is vibrating at a certain frequency, every atom, every molecule is vibrating. And the quote I gave you was, it's even in the Bible. It's like in one of the first, I think, verses. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and Word was God." He's already telling us that His voice manifested the universe into creation. It's word is sound. It's vibrating every single molecule into existence and forming everything that we have. It's a manifestation of everything that our reality. The whole universe.
Yeah.
Was spoken into being, right?
Right.
There you go.
And so what do you want? Like what do you want the city of Laredo to look like? You've got how many grandchildren now?
The two,
I mean, what sort of city do you want for your grandchildren?
a city that offers, first of all, primary, my safety.
And-
we need to make sure that our borders are safe.
And we're one of the safest cities in the U.S., right? I think we had like 9 homicides last year, and just so you know, New Orleans is the same size as Laredo. They have 9 homicides like on a weekend. And safety, okay, safety check.
Safety is important.
¿Qué más?
And then I'm glad to see all the development up north.
And-
On the Seattle area, all the new restaurants are coming in. And hopefully we can, in a lot of those development, that same kind of development towards the far south. That's great. Most cities just grow to the north. It's great to see Laredo growing in all different directions, north, south.
But we don't have a choice, right? 'Cause
Exactly.
we got the river on one side, and then we've got a few ranches on the other.
Well, we still have that explosive growth. We still need to go back and zoom and see what we can do with the downtown area.
There's a lot of infill, though, that has not taken place. There's a lot of empty space within the city that
Well,
we could incentivize to be certain things.
have to be there because the cost of development in the city of Laredo is still real high. We have to incentivize people to infill. We need to incentivize mall to do better, repave the parking lots and refurbish some of the outside of the building. We need to do all we can to help the people downtown get back on their feet and bring the tourism back downtown. I mean, it's a diamond in the rough. It has a lot to offer. You just need to get, and then here again, I'm very encouraged to hear that the council is going to be investing in a lot of segment of the city. So I think good things are coming our way, and that's a step in the right direction.
How about you, Benny? What do you see for, like, what would you like to see your city look like in 5, 10, 20 years?
Well, that's a good question. I think, as we were discussing earlier, I think downtown needs to be revitalized again. It's missing that certain, kind of like the theater. Every time I see the theater, I see it as a missed opportunity. I wish it was kind of like the Aztec Theater in San Antonio.
I love the Aztec.
It was beautiful. It's a beautiful venue.
It's amazing. Yeah.
I kind of wish we had something like that here, where we could bring some small but awesome acts, bands, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's what I would like to see in Laredo. Some of those arts and culture in downtown.
Yeah.
It's missing it. It's missing that heartbeat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's
I'm gonna kind of go a little bit deeper, right? I see a multimodal outer loop that has utilities, fiber. It's got electricity. It's got rail. It has pedestrian, commercial, passenger vehicle, all linked from mile marker 18 to Rio Bravo and El Cenizo to the bridge 4-5, and it hot foots into Mexico, and that rail traffic, all those what is it, like I think it's like 30 at grade railroad crossings that cuts through West Laredo, and then there's like another 20 or so that cuts through east to west in districts 3 and 4. I see railroads and all that out. I see the old railroad right of ways turned into these like in Mexico City, you've got those avenida principal, it's trees, it's cars, it's a boulevard, it's bike, it's shaded, and you turn all those old rail right of ways into these giant linear vias where people can get in and around on whatever they want to do. You want to get on a car, great. You want to get on a bus, con madre. You want to get on then you take the air quality knob and and you turn it all the way to the right. It gets a lot better because you got this traffic that's no longer here in town. I see an incentive package for warehouses to capture rainfall off of their rooftops because water is so critical, and it's becoming more and more scarce with each year that's coming by. I see world-class public schools, and we're seeing some of that already. I mean, at LISD and UISD, some of these campuses are performing really well. I see a pipeline from elementary to high school to college to university to professional to vocational. I'm seeing that we remain one of the safest cities in the United States, but also one of the most sustainable cities in the United States. I'm seeing people like you and friends and our family running for office, answering the call and bringing their expertise, bringing their gifts to public office. And I'm seeing us becoming competitive with other border cities. Right now, definitely the Valley they've got 11 bridges combined. We only El Paso has 7, and we're only really running what, 1, 2, 3, 4 Columbia. I'm seeing us very much gathering our position in this regional setting as a border community, seeing us getting a secondary water source that we have control over. And I mean specifically capturing the sewage effluent, refiltering that, running it through some wetlands, having a closed loop, if you will. I'm seeing efficiencies baked into that, us drilling our own wells, desaling the brackish water that's underneath our feet, and being in control of our own destiny as it relates to water, and not being just dependent on the Rio Grande that has a scheduled shelf life of 12 to 15 years as a reliable water source. I'm seeing some real growth in the agricultural sector so that we're not this big food desert, so that we're actually creating some of our own food and converting solar energy into wealth. And so I can see a brighter future. We've got this phenomenal law enforcement community, CBP, Border Patrol, HSI. We got DEA to a lesser degree, FBI, TD, SO, Constable's Office, UISD. We're a law enforcement town. Why, as a law enforcement town, that's one of the reasons we're super safe. Plus, we got a lot of great people in this town. That's the other reason we're super safe. Yeah, there's some criminal element, but not like it is in other cities. And
And you mentioned great things, George. You mentioned the outer loop. That's been on the drawing board for years, man. They've never gone out there to acquire land to make it possible. Look at the inner loop. What's happened? It's turned into another McPherson.
yeah,
They do these feasibility studies, and by the time they get the project off the ground, the city's grown tremendously. And
they build what we needed 10 years ago today.
right, that's what.
And we need to be building what we need 20 years down the road. And that
Those
requires
projections are always off.
that requires vision, right?
We have the MPO for that.
And Gene Bermudez and I were talking the other day, and he quoted the Bible about, it was a quote like, lest you fail for lack of vision, right? And really, if none of our elected officials currently in Laredo, in my estimation, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see any of them really talking about the vision the way your generation of public leaders were talking about when y'all were looking on the other side of the horizon, You were looking 20 years down the road, and that's what San Antonio is doing. That's what Austin is doing. I was watching a documentary on China's planning for the future. As a country, what they're doing compared to what we're doing by way of planning. Like, our kids are playing on PS5s. Their kids are making the PS5s, right? We're so far behind as a nation by way of long-term planning. And, for that lack of vision, things are going to be very difficult for the generation to come. But everybody gets their wake-up call at some point in time. Hopefully we'll get ours in enough time to, get off the first-class deck of the Titanic and start patching the hole down in the hull.
You give some figures. You said 30% of the community under the poverty.
At or below the poverty line.
Yeah, because we don't have the disposable income some other communities have. You still have low prevailing wages in our community.
Well, we don't even have any meaningful public transportation to get single moms, which have been identified as the most vulnerable population here in Laredo, helping get single moms to work, or helping get their kids to school, or helping getting them to college. Like, we don't, like, if you look at VIA, the public transportation system in San Antonio, I mean, they're on it. They're all about physical mobility equals social mobility. And to ignore the poor is against Christian values, right? And what are we doing to help those folks get up and out of poverty? That's the fundamental question. Because it's interesting that as a nation, we say, oh, well, we're Christian. Oh, okay, really? Well, how are you treating the poor? How are you treating the immigrants? How are you treating the least among us? That's really the fundamental question that I think every Christian has to ask themselves. And you could write a check to your local church or to your, to the Bethany house, and that's fine. I mean, that's homelessness. Bethany house, that's like abject. But in between homelessness and that single mom who's a paycheck away from being homeless, there's a lot of good that can be done. And I think that God is going to ask us, hey, how hard did you work to help out that vulnerable segment of the population? And we're going to have to answer for that.
Look at what our nation's done to the veterans. So many homeless veterans. That's
tragic.
Totally uncalled for.
Yeah, tragic. And we asked them to do the unthinkable, and then they come back home all broken, and then we abandon them.
Physically, mentally.
Yeah, spiritually. Yeah. Well, I didn't want to leave on that low note.
Laredo has a lot to offer. We have a great university, has tremendous potential.
Yes.
We have the UT Health Science Center, has tremendous potential.
Yep.
There's tremendous room at the Laredo Airport, former Laredo Airport.
Yep.
For that to grow into a more shining star in our community. We have a lot of things already here, a lot of seats already there.
Yeah.
To continue to.
And we've got, I think we've got some of the warmest people, just some of the most hospitable, kind folks in this community. And they'll welcome you into their homes. They'll welcome you into their businesses. They'll go out of their way. And it's a beautiful thing. And to all those beautiful people, I'll say, you can also serve by running for elected office. And I tell folks all the time, it's not that difficult. I mean, I got myself elected, and I'm really not that likable of a guy. And so if I can do it, you can do it. And so get out and call me, please. And I'm sure you can call Eliseo and Mr. Valdez will tell you.
People that have a heart to serve the community, I would encourage them to get involved, talk to their council people, their county judges, or their commissioners, and ask them, how can I get involved, and get them appointed and assigned to different committees to get an idea of what it takes to get things moving in our community.
Because that quote from JFK, it still stands, right? Like, ask not what your city can do for you, but what can you do for your city? Because to whom much is given,
much is required. Yeah.
So thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. And for making it easy for me. It's been a pleasure seeing you guys.
Yeah.
Are in the right place, though.
And man, Benny, like Johnny on the spot, showed up, you know, and got us all wired up for sound. And
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. This was awesome.
yeah,
This is great.
well, hopefully we'll get together and do it again.
Will do. Will do.
Okay, until next time. God bless.
God bless you. Hope to be back.
Yes, definitely.
Love to have you back.